yes, G-Wagen is back, and come over to the side. It now gets 5 doors. So Force Motors were going to launch this around last Diwali, but they resisted the urge to rush it into the market and instead focused on sorting out the flaws, because the earlier Gurkha, the 2021 Gurkha, it had a few flaws. The first area of criticism is, of course, this engine. Number one was power. Oh, it desperately needed more power. You actually get in very unconventionally. Getting into the back seat was a strange affair. A lap belt, not a 3-point seat belt. And when you were in the back, you noticed you only got a lap belt. We didn't notice it at first, but turned out the Gurkha needed more ground clearance. It didn't have an automatic gearbox. So has this updated Gurkha sorted out the shortcomings of the past? That's how we have structured this video. And because the Gurkha still retains those locking differentials, 3 locking differentials, we are going to go off-roading. Like seriously, hardcore off-roading. Welcome to Evo India, and if you're new to our channel, may I suggest hit that subscribe button and also hit that bell icon so you stay notified for when our videos are dropped. Towards the end of the video, if you've enjoyed this, give us a thumbs up and also let us know in the comments if this new updated 5-door Gurkha has met your expectations. And if you're looking for an automatic gearbox and looking for the relevant chapter to jump to, let me burst that bubble right here, right now. The updated Gurkha still doesn't get an automatic gearbox. There was nothing wrong and everything to love about the Gurkha styling. Boxy proportions, classic G-Wagen styling, everything drawn with a ruler, and it looks brilliant. And if you're wondering, why didn't Mercedes sue the hell out of Force Motors? Well, back when the very first Gurkha was launched and was being developed, Mercedes, Daimler, they had a stake in Force Motors, or Bajaj Tempo as it was then called. In fact, Bajaj Tempo / Force had an excellent relationship with Mercedes. The OM 616 engine, that was a Mercedes engine, and not a copy of a Mercedes engine, but a proper licensed Mercedes engine. So much so that the parts that were made for India were sent to Mercedes-Benz, and those were going out to all Mercedes-Benz customers to support their after sales. Also, the very first Tempo Traveler, the Traveler as we know, which is bread and butter of Force Motors, that was also based on a Mercedes monocoque van. So a lot of relationship with them, and it's great because at this price, which is maybe 5% of a price of a G-Wagen, you can get something that looks like a G-Wagen. Now, this is not an episode of Gone But Not Forgotten, so we won't dwell too much into the past and the history. If you like that series, the latest video on the Ford Endeavour, all the generations of the Endeavour sold in India, is live now on the Evo India channel. And very soon, we will also have the Pajero and Montero on the Evo India channel. So, you know what to do. Hit that bell icon to stay notified for that video drops. As for this, coming back to the present, the 2024 Gurkha, it is based on the 2021 Gurkha, but obviously it's got 5 doors, modern build, the doors shut with a nice third. The panel gaps are a little big, but it is uniform. You have these nice exposed hinges. So overall, the design, the fit finish is actually pretty good. And the big update are these 18-inch wheels. But the bigger differences are on the inside. So come on over. The 2 big updates to the interiors are the 2 new screens. So you have this digital cockpit, which is a 7-inch screen, and you have this aftermarket looking touchscreen infotainment, which is a 9-inch screen. Now, they're not making any attempt to hide the fact that this is aftermarket, though the way it has been positioned doesn't look too bad at all. It's got this Nippon on it. They claim it has got Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, but I don't think it is activated yet because we couldn't get it to work. But it has inbuilt navigation, which is Google Maps, which actually works really well. Your USB slots are out here, but there's no getting away from the basic architecture of the dashboard, which has been taken from the Trax commercial passenger vehicle. Even the steering wheel has been taken from the Trax, and you don't even have the volume controls, no controls on the steering wheel. I think this is the only car in India which doesn't have that. But you have an airbag out here, another airbag out there, which is mandated by law. The steering wheel also, it adjusts for reach as well as brake. And this is the only off-roader that actually has that. The Thar or the Jimny don't have it. And another change over the 2021 Gurkha, the 4x4 lever that used to be there, that has gone, and in comes this dial. And if you are of my vintage, you will immediately recognize this dial, because this dial is what I remember the very first Safari, the 4x4 Safari, that had. So an iconic dial which doesn't look out of place even today. I quite like it. In fact, to give you a frame of reference, when Tata Motors moved from this dial to a small button on the dash, I hated it and I called it out. So I like the fact that it has got this dial, though again, come to think of it, I prefer that second lever for 4x4. But of course, this just adds to the convenience, and we will talk about that later on when we get to the off-roading. So where this space was for the lever, there is another cubby hole. Your iPhone fits in it quite well, though you don't get wireless charging, and you got two bottle holders, a space again for your phone out here, USB behind, your power window switches out here, and of course your front and rear differential locks. What else is new? You also get this foldable armrest, which is really nice. We will talk about that when we are driving. And on the cluster, that integrates the tire pressure monitoring system. Now this cluster, you can't change the displays. That is the one display, but you can change the color when you switch between eco and power mode. And power brings me to the engine. The 2021 Gurkha was desperately lacking in power. 89 bhp in a 2.2-ton SUV that has all the aerodynamics of a brick wall was just not going to cut it. That was our single biggest criticism. And that's the single biggest improvement in this, the 2024 Gurkha. So it gets the same 2.6-liter 4-cylinder diesel engine, but now the power has been upgraded. It gets 138 bhp and 320 Newton meters of torque. So it now has good enough power and good enough torque figures. So what does it feel like on the road? Okay, first things first, it gets only the manual gearbox. This is a 5-speed manual, not a 6-speed manual gearbox. It's not the same manual gearbox from the earlier Gurkha, because this has been upgraded to take the additional torque. In terms of the power band now, it's got a very narrow power band. The torque comes in nice and strong from as low as 1100, 1200 RPM. I'm at 40, I'm in 4th, it's 1100 RPM. Bit of vibration, but it still pulls. So in terms of that long-legged feel to do long distances, I think this will be okay. It won't be all that fast. It has got the grunt. But if you want to cane it, for instance, I'm putting it into second, it runs out of juice at 3400 RPM. So you got a 1200 to 3400 RPM power band, and that is a pretty narrow power band. So when you're caning it, you really have to row through the gearbox quite aggressively. It's not fire-breathing quick, to be honest, but it's not desperately slow either. So it does address that problem to an extent. But you'll be really familiar with this gearbox. Your left hand, your left leg will get a good workout. And that brings me to the fact that this is not the best gearbox. In fact, amongst all the manual gearboxes that we have on sale today, and they're not that many to be honest, this would probably be at the bottom in terms of the shift quality, the shift feel. It's a bit long in throw, rubbery in feel. The clutch also needs a little bit more effort than I would think necessary. So what do you need more power, more torque especially for? It is to make highway driving a little less stressful, more relaxed. And in that sense, this definitely does it. 320 Newton meters of torque is pretty good, and it makes for relaxed cruising down our highways. This is the new elevated road in Goa that leads to the Mopa airport. You stick it in 5th gear and it cruises along comfortably. 5th gear at 100 kmph, that equates to 2200 RPM, which is a relaxed cruise. So on places where you can do 120 Ks, this can cruise along without a problem. It gets more power, but it doesn't get upgraded brakes. So disc brakes at the front, Drum brakes at the rear. Yep, it still has drum brakes at the rear, and the brake pedal feel is very long, very soft, and doesn't really give you that confidence. It stops all right. I would have liked better bite from the brakes and better initial feel, but drum brakes in this day and age, plus it doesn't have ESP. You get ABS obviously because now that's mandatory. In terms of safety also, you get 2 front airbags, which is mandated by the law, and thankfully now all the seats except the middle seat in the middle row have got proper 3-point seat belts. You no longer get into the middle row from the back. You now climb in normally because it has got the convenience of 5 doors, but you also have to use the running board to climb into it, also use the grab handle on the B pillar, because this is a very tall vehicle. Because of the 18-inch wheels, the ground clearance has gone up to 233 mm, which is claimed to be better than the Thar. Now, in terms of space, you can fit in at the back, but it's not very generous, and that's because I sit a little bit stretched out. But if you take the seat slightly in front, you will have enough of space at the back. You can actually sit 3 abreast because this is wide, and it doesn't have like a big transmission tunnel that eats into your space. The center console, that is what eats into your space, but no transmission tunnel because obviously this is a ladder frame. You also get proper 3-point seat belts at the back, so you can strap in properly. It's much better for safety, obviously. Strap in over there. Okay, you need 2 hands for this. Okay, strap in. You got an armrest out here, but the middle chappy still has to do with a lap belt. You get plenty of headroom, and because there's so much of headroom, there is this blower unit which cools the middle and the 3rd row passengers. Now, the blower is not integrated into the roof lining. This is that blower that is attached to the roof. Doesn't look very polished in this day and age, but it does its job. The aircon on the Gurkha is actually pretty good. This is a massive cabin, lots of space inside it, but the aircon does a damn good job. Now, this middle row, it doesn't recline, it doesn't slide, so getting in at the back is again that old rear entry method, and in the middle you don't get captain seats, but right at the back you still get captain seats. So getting into the back is again this strange rear entry method, but at the rear you get captain seats. The suspension towers, that intrudes into your leg space, so you have to sit slightly angled, but you have proper 3-pointed seat belts even at the rear. In terms of space, this is actually as good as the middle row in terms of your knee room. Headroom is plenty. That roof mounted blower system that actually throws in a good amount of air at the back. You have these bottle holders, elastic bottle holders out here. Your window doesn't go down. This is a fixed window, and overall NVH is actually pretty good. This might look strange, but this is easier to get in and out of rather than contorting and yourself folding the seats in front. I didn't mention that the seat back angle of the middle row is a little too upright. Same at the rear, and you can't adjust the angle. And if you want more space, there are some 4 or 6 bolts that bolt the seats down into the floor, so you can take it out and throw out the seats, and you can get lots of boot space out here. But now, enough of all this seating business. Let's get back to the driving. In addition to the engine, the suspension has also been upgraded, particularly the front suspension. The main difference is that the lower control arms, those have been redesigned. So the problems with the ground clearance of the Gurkha, that stemmed from those lower arms being too low and catching with whatever you were going over. So that has been redesigned. You now get significantly more in terms of ground clearance, 233 millimeters. It's also down to the larger 18-inch wheels from the 16s on the earlier Gurkha. And Force Motors insists that they have focused a lot on the driving dynamics, the on-road behavior. Off-road behavior really was never an issue with the Gurkha. It still has these locking differentials. Nothing else you can buy. Nothing else gets locking differentials. So that was never a problem area. they didn't have to bother with it. What they needed to focus on was making it better to drive on the road. And first things first, you're going over these narrow roads, you have to put two wheels on the dirt, and the ride quality on the Gurkha is phenomenal. This is one of the most comfortable SUVs, cars, whatever, most comfortable that you can buy. It's still soft, but it is very pliant. The absorption is really good. Of course, the downside is that you have ample amount of body roll. There's no getting away from that. This is still a ladder frame chassis. This is obviously the new chassis that was introduced in 2021, not the old Gurkha chassis. But you have a lot of body roll. The steering is vague and imprecise. It has got good assistance. It doesn't feel too light, neither does it feel too heavy. So the weighting is spot on. But this is an old school steering system. It does have plenty of turns lock to lock. But the turning circle has been reduced to 5.5 meters. That they say is even better than the Thar. So in terms of maneuverability, it's actually very good. And speaking about maneuverability, on these narrow roads, another thing that comes to the fore is that even though this is a big SUV, especially now with this 5-door spec, this is a big, long, wide SUV, but it's not difficult to drive on narrow roads. You sit high up, the visibility is phenomenal, absolutely incredible. You can place this with accuracy. You go over these speed breakers and you barely notice it. Go faster over the speed breakers and it really flattens it out really well. And the driving position, man, this is king of the world. It's absolutely phenomenal, this driving position. I love it. The addition of this armrest on the captain seats, that's also very nice. And this is proper old school. Going around corners is proper old school. Even at this low speeds, you can feel it. It's a very old school way of driving, which I don't mind, because there are a lot of these modern SUVs that drive like cars, and it is great. But if you want something that reminds you of the past, but with still the creature comforts that you're used to, this really does a good job. It's a very left field alternative, and it's not for everybody. I'll be brutally honest about it. But for those who want that solid, rugged, old school charm, this fits the bill. And damn, just look at the way it looks. It really is the Indian G-Wagen. I'm a fan. I'm an incorrigible fan of these things. But let me repeat myself, this is not for everybody. So before you go and spam the comments and troll me, this is not for everybody. Gearbox, you have to work it. Brakes, it is soft. Handling, it is roly-poly. But it has charm. A charm that you won't find anywhere else. Like, really, you won't find it anywhere else. Now, there's only one spec that you can get the Gurkha in. Two specs actually. You get the 3-door as well as the 5-door. And the 3-door and the 5-door are identical, apart from obviously the increase in the wheelbase. All the equipment levels are the same, so there's no stripped out version, and there is no rear wheel drive Gurkha. All are 4x4 with the low ratio transfer case with the locking differentials. Now, Force Motors, they've laid out this off-road track, but honestly, I've done really serious off-roading in the Gurkha. Out here, you don't even need to engage the locking differentials. Just keep it in 4 low, stick it in first, and you let it crawl. So it's got this nice crawling mode that has been mapped into the ECU. So I don't even have to use the accelerator. It will even crawl up these slopes. So I'm just trying it out. Going up the slope. Crawling. I got my right foot off the gas and it will just crawl up. And this also has hill descent control mapped into the ECU. No pressing the buttons required. So both my feet are off. And it's going down, hill descent control activated, and it's inching down gently. You just have to steer, that's it. We now have the side slope, which is a 30-degree side slope. I only have a spotter telling me where to put my wheels. Again, I'm not touching the accelerator or the brake. Just positioning the car, it is creeping along at 2 kilometers an hour creep speed and into the 30-degree side slope. Again, don't do anything, just steer. Now, the reason why they have this 30-degree slope is to highlight the fact that this will not tip over. This is actually a very tall SUV. Obviously, the center of gravity is high. In fact, the center of gravity has gone up compared to the 3-door Gurkha, but it's not tipping over. And again, I'm not doing anything. The ECU, the engine mapping is doing everything, and it's just chugging along. This is actually old school chugging. This engine, the 2.6 liter engine, the cubic capacity, it traces its roots back to the OM 616 diesel engine that Force Motors started off making, which was in the very first Gurkha, which was in the Tempo Traveler. But obviously, it has been updated to all the current emission norms. So much has changed that it's only the cubic capacity that is identical to the OM616. But that's the DNA of this engine. And I'm not sure about the gearbox, but I think that too. In terms of the off-road angles, the Gurkha has a 35-degree gradability, 28-degree ramp over angle, 37-degree departure, 700 mm water weighting, and that's why you have the snorkel up there, and obviously the ground clearance has gone up. And that's what we are checking out here in this breakover test. So even the 5-door long wheelbase, it's not touching. And here you've got your articulation, potholes. Really, it's very laloo for the Gurkha. In their plant at Akudi outside Pune, Force Motors have a really extreme off-roading track, and I'm going to convince Force Motors to let us take this updated Gurkha out there and do some crazy stuff, because this is barely scratching the surface of the Gurkha's capabilities. I know I said that we're going to be doing some serious hardcore off-roading. I thought we would be, but this is, whatever you see now, is just scratching the surface of the Gurkha's capabilities. It can be done in 4x4 high also. You don't really need to go into 4 low for all of this. It still has a few flaws. For instance, the power is still not enough. The cabin is a little too basic. It still has only rear drum brakes, no ESP. So that's still there, but on the whole, this has improved considerably, like really considerably improved. But what Force Motors really needs to work on, forget the pricing aspect of it, they need to work on making this a cool product. It's not enough just looking like a G-Wagen. It needs to have the draw, the attraction, the desirability of the Indian G-Wagen, and that's what Force Motors needs to work on. Obviously, they're sorting out the basics. So they say that they will very soon have 54 Gurkha outlets. Now, I haven't seen any, but they're saying 54 sales outlets and over 100 service points. Of course, the service points will be full of travelers, but you can service this anywhere. They're also going to give you a 3-year, 1.5 lakh kilometer warranty, which is great. They're going to give you free roadside assistance for the first year, which is even better. They will also give you 4 free services, which is all great. But what I love the most is that in this day and age of front-wheel drive monocoque SUVs, you can still buy an old school hardcore ladder frame SUV with 3 locking differentials.